There is two types of due diligence. There's analytical due diligence, which mostly everybody knows. You look at leases, you look at contracts, you look at disbursements, rent rolls, etc. But there's something that I've learned that I've coined the phrase psychological due diligence. What makes the owner tick? And God, we have made a fortune doing psychological due diligence.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 332. Even in these challenging economic times, multifamily real estate continues to perform exceptionally well. Hypergrowth in this investment market has led to intense competition for available properties. But instead of getting caught up in the frenzy and making a reckless purchase that could sink you, it's critical to carry out an on-the-ground inquiry. Take the time to find out what's really behind the seller's motivation to sell and use street knowledge to discover whether it's a sound investment. And think outside of the box about where to find hidden value. Those are the big ideas motivating my guest today. Sam Liebman is the founder and CEO of WealthWay Equity Group, a New York-based private equity and real estate development company. He's owned substantial interest in multifamily communities, office buildings, and shopping centers to the ground-up construction of a luxury 21-story condominium development in Manhattan. His new book is called Harvard Can't Teach What You Learn from the Streets, the Street Success Guide to Building Wealth Through Multifamily Real Estate. Sam, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So thank you for being here. And I love the title of your book. I'm wondering if you could just kind of explain, what does Harvard not teach that you learned from the streets?
What goes on in the real world? Basically, I wrote the book to stress the fundamentals. A lot of these courses that I saw online never teach you how the car works. They teach you how to sell the car. This book will teach you how the car works, how the real estate business works. It stresses fundamentals using multifamily properties as the case study so that you can learn and to build lasting wealth. It's all about lasting wealth, focuses on the fundamentals and how to increase property value.
Well, let's talk about fundamentals. What do you see as being the core fundamentals of investing in multifamily real estate?
Learning how powerful what I call cap rate power is. So let me give you an example. I use this formula, P equals N over C. And I call it the Einstein formula for real estate. And it shows in this simple formula, which I'll explain, how powerful it is. And it equals property value, simple equation, equals net operating income over the cap rate. Now, let me explain what that means and how powerful it is. This formula will tell you that every time that you increase a rent by $1 or decrease an expense by $1 in a what we call 5 cap environment, you've increased property value $20. Now, that is really powerful because it means that if you could somehow reduce expenses when you look at a property, give you a perfect example. You look at a property, 100 units, water and sewer is $80,000 a year. And you know from experience by mastering the fundamentals that it should only be $70,000 or $60,000, a year. To me, water leaks, underground water leaks. That should give you your spider sense start tingling to know that there's an opportunity here to increase property value. How? Well, if you take $10,000 that you can save on this expense, divided by the 5% cap rate, that comes out to over $200,000 in property value. So if you were looking for this at this property, even while you're doing your due diligence, before you even close, many times I've noticed hey, I just increased the property value $2, $3, $4, $500,000 before I closed because I've identified expenses overlooked by others. And I've made a fortune doing that. And that's by mastering the fundamentals. In my book, Harvard Can't Teach, What You Learn from the Streets, shows you this, shows you. What else do I mean by fundamentals? Well, fundamentals is learning how building a multifamily works. What are the different types of categories of expenses? What are the different categories of income? How does it work? How does the car work? Okay. And once you learn those fundamentals, you could learn to identify opportunities overlooked by others, as well as potential problems that are overlooked by others. That's how you make money in real estate. You increase property value. And that's what we focus on. And that's how you build wealth. Now, there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. And Chris Rock said it best. He said, Shaq is rich. The guy who signs his check is wealthy. Now, how do you obtain wealth? Well, the most common way is to obtain a large asset base that increases annually and over time. And real estate is the best vehicle to do that.
Sam, I love your example of looking at the expenses of a property you might buy, recognizing an extraordinarily high water cost or utility expense, and then figuring out, hey, if you just go in and fix that, you can immediately add $200,000 in value to the property. And by the way, you're talking about the math and how the math works, and anybody investing in multifamily really needs to understand how the math works. But I'm wondering if you can share any other specific examples where you've recognized problems while doing your due diligence that you were able to immediately solve and add immediate value to the property.
We look at different things. Like, for instance, in a multifamily environment, if you see a property and outside there's gates. Well, gates can cost $200,000, $300,000 to install. So if they're already there, that's an asset. You might have to fix it up a little bit. Okay. Pools cost a lot of money to put in a pool. Sometimes I don't recommend pools, but in general, the infrastructure is so important. Is the roof maintained? You know, if a roof can cost you $200,000 or more. Condition of the roof. But I also look for opportunities to increase revenue and decrease expenses. So revenue might be, well, we have plenty of room for what's called covered parking. Covered parking can cost $200,000 in a 100-unit building or so to install. But you can charge an extra $25 to $50 a space. So if you could put 100 spaces or even 50 spaces, look at how much the rental income increased. And if you divide that by your cap rate again, it's a lot more than the $200,000 you spent for the property. That's how you increase property value and cash flow. That's another example. There are many others. As far as expenses go, I look at what contract they have. Many times I see an electric bill that's just paid with no contract. Well, a lot of states have deregularized all the electricity. So it's like a commodity. You could go out and sign a contract at your choosing for a much lower price. I've seen landscapers in Minnesota that are charging for the whole year. Why do I need a landscaper for a snowstorm? Why am I paying him for the whole year? And in the book, there's many, many of these ways they call it value add is the industry term. But again, owning property, to me, the big money and what the pros do is they seek ways to increase property value, adding some amenities to a property. For instance, we had a student housing property in Austin where there were 2 laundry rooms. We didn't need 2 laundry rooms, so we converted the small laundry room to a gym. We were the only ones that had a gym in the area. I mean, that attracted a lot of people. There's a lot of things like this. Charging for signage, increasing the rentable square footage of the building. In New York, one of the things we've done is we have a 5-story walk-up. We added a rec room, or we built on the roof. Or on the first floor, we did a duplex to the basement. This is adding the amount that you can charge rent on, adding to the amount of rentable square footage. This drastically increases property value.
I love every example you just gave, except for one.
Which one?
The utility charge. Here in Michigan, they deregulated the utilities. I don't know how far back, but you can get a third-party gas provider and lock in a certain rate. And usually that makes sense, and it's great for the first 2 years. But then at some point, they switch it on you. This happened to us, and it cost us tens of thousands of dollars. They increased the rate 3 times above what the utility company was actually charging. And we were stuck in that, didn't realize it. Took us about 3 or 4 months to realize it. And then once we realized it and tried to get out of it, it took us another 3 to 4 months, cost us tens of thousands of dollars. I will never sign another contract with a third-party utility provider.
I've never had that problem. And we just use a third-party consultant, but we're actually dealing with the energy company itself.
It gets billed through the energy company, but like I said, it's great in the beginning. But then at some point it goes off the rails. And I've had it happen to me multiple times here in Michigan. Maybe it's better in New York.
Well, I've Texas and I've never had that problem.
Okay, well, maybe it's just a Michigan problem. But I do love all your other examples. I mean, we've bought our own laundry machines. We have installed dog washes, fitness rooms, like you've said. There are a lot of ways to add value. I want to switch gears and talk about the hidden story. And you talk about that in your book. And you also talk about doing psychological due diligence when you're buying a property. Are those the same thing? How would you differentiate the hidden story and the psychological due diligence?
Psychological due diligence is a way of uncovering the hidden story. Why is the property for sale? Real estate's such a great investment. Why are they selling the property? There's good reasons. There's bad reasons. We identify a lot of that in the book. So there is 2 types of due diligence. There's analytical due diligence, which mostly everybody knows. You look at leases, you look at contracts, you look at disbursements, rent rolls, etc. But there's something that I've learned, that I've coined the phrase psychological due diligence. What makes the owner tick? And God, we have made a fortune doing psychological due diligence. And that is doing a profile of the owner. Give you an example. I'll just use a fictitious name. If Joe Simon, owns a property and he does everything possible to suck out all the potential in that building, what am I going to do different if I buy one of his buildings that he sells? Nothing. So I want to know, doing psychological due diligence, first, one of the first questions is, who owns the building? What's his profile? What's he like in negotiations? Why does he sell? When does he sell? Well, he sells if he can't do anything else to the building. The rents are maxed out. He's done everything. I'm not going to do anything better. So if I see that owner owns the building, I'll shy away from that property. Now, if I see that the property was owned for 30 years by an old fellow that passed away, and the 3 kids that aren't talking to each other and won't put a dime in the building and live in 3 different states, that's my kind of guy. So you got to learn the backstory or the hidden story. And I actually have checklists of profiles that I use. There are many examples. Another example is how hard is it to get the name on the contract? What entity is the property owned in? Many times a property is owned in a corporation, and the day before you're ready to sign the contract, the owner calls his accountant and says, I'm selling the property. You're going to say, wait a minute, you're going to have a tremendous tax in the corporation, because property should not be owned by a corporation. 9 out of 10 times, he's going to come back to you to solve his tax problem. So I always want to know what type of entity the property is in. The worst is sometimes it's owned in the state. And I give an example in the book, how we had a handshake with a person that owned this beautiful property. I was drooling, and she just had to get a grandmother's signature, which would be no problem. Turned out to be a big problem, because not only did she need the grandmother, but she needed, the grandmother's sister and some nieces. So I want to know ahead of time, who owns the property? How hard is it to get the authority to sell the property? I've wasted a lot of time and energy that way. And there are many, many examples. I mean, we could do a whole show on that. So I want to know what's going on in the back room. Is there a toxic waste dump ready to explode under the building? Does the seller, one important thing I talk about is in the stock market, if you obtain inside information, you can go to jail. In real estate, if you don't seek inside information, you go to the poorhouse. Now, in real estate, the seller is the CEO. And if he knows, for example, that one of his largest tenants is not going to renew their lease or is on the verge of bankruptcy, he doesn't have to disclose that to you. Real estate's a game of hide and seek. Here's how you play. The seller hides every problem, and the buyer has to seek it. Unfortunately, it's much harder to find the problem than it is to hide it. And that's why psychological due diligence and the procedures that I talk about in the book help to uncover this hidden value.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB & Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com.
What are the top 3 procedures you use to do that psychological due diligence?
Well, I use these comprehensive profiles that I've developed, like checklists. I call people. A lot of times we establish relationships with lawyers who I said, do you know Joe Simon? Oh yeah, I know that. How is he in negotiations? He's really tough. He starts negotiating right after he signs the contract. Guys like that. Or he's tough but fair. I learned I could learn that he's in deep financial trouble. Everybody knows things. So you establish this relationship with title companies, construction people, lawyers, accountants, and I gain a lot of information. Another thing about psychological due diligence is shyness can cost you money. I sit in the diner. Everyone loves in the book the story about how I talked to the town drunk and he saved me $200,000. And it's an absolute true story. And again, this is just, I always say shyness again can cost you money. Go out and interview people. I sit in the diner. I ask about the building. Best way to get information is if you could find a recently fired employee. Boy, will they spill their guts. But believe me, it's like an undercover detective who gets a profile of their suspect. In real estate, your suspect is the seller. So you have to use these methods that I've developed and their checklists. Talk to this, talk to that, talk to the police. They'll tell you the crime is really bad here and getting worse, or the crime isn't as bad as they're saying. You get on the street smarts, learn what's going on, put your ear to the pavement, find out what's going on. You learn more, talk to the neighbors. This is how you get information. And that's what we do.
You mentioned the story in the book about talking to the town drunk and what you found out. Can you share that with our listeners?
That's everybody's favorite, it seems. So I think it was 1997, 98. We were in contract to buy this building, 30 units and like 4 stores on the corner of Avenue B in the East Village of New York City. And the day before, my money was supposed to go hard, which means non-refundable, my contract deposit. I took one last walk around, get some more pictures. And as I was looking diagonally across the street, there was an old man talking to himself, reeking from urine, he was wondering, what do you do? I said, I'm buying that building across the street. And he started roaring. Man, I could still see the flames coming out of that building. I said, flames? The fire, man, the fire. What fire? Man, 25 years ago, the fire, man. I don't know how that building's still standing. Now, the building had a C of O. The building department passed it, right? They did inspections. What fire? So I had my engineer and architect go back to the building to re-inspect. Because usually when you do an inspection, they just do a cursory visual examination, see if they see anything that's out of whack. They didn't. So we found out by re-examining it under the rafters and in some other areas, there was charred wood, evidence of the fire. Nobody admitted they knew of the fire, nobody. But my architect assured me that it would cost about $10,000, $12,000 to fix. It wasn't that bad. But we went back with that, what I call inside information, and we got almost a $200,000 reduction in price just by talking to the town drunk.
Wow. Did you go buy him a drink afterward?
Yeah, I couldn't find him after that, actually. But, that's a true story. I mean, I mean, that's what we do. I talk to my son gets mad at me. Dad, why are you always talking to people? And we go to a diner. Why are you always talking? I talk. I ask questions. What's the worst that could happen? What are they going to say? I'll never see some of these people again. I get information. What does a police officer do? I mean, a detective. He interviews people, right? You got to do the same thing in real estate. The suspect is the seller. There are good reasons for selling a building and there are bad reasons. Good reasons would be the owner wants to cash out. Or he's sick of management. He's getting older. He wants to sell, do a 1031 exchange and go to a bigger, less management intensive property. Those are legitimate reasons, but there's also bad reasons, like a catastrophe waiting to happen or a big tenant not moving, moving. So you have to uncover these. And right now, due diligence periods are becoming shorter than ever because property is seen as gold. As you know, we talked about before the interview, there's lines of people waiting for properties, but I will never cut my due diligence, no matter how much pressure is on me. In Texas, right now, there is, for choice properties, you have to pay a $100,000 participation fee just to get the due diligence for the right to bid on the property. And if you get it, if you're chosen, it gets credited. But if you don't get it back. It's a cost of doing business. This is what's going on. For every good property, there's lines of people for it. Residential now, as you know, is hotter than the hottest stove you can put on. And I think it's going to continue doing that. On the other hand, I believe that office and retail is headed towards Armageddon. So the residential real estate, because of the tremendous financing that you can get, is just hotter than ever.
So you just said two things in there that I have to follow up on. Did I hear you correctly that in Texas, just to be at the bidding table, you have to pay $100,000?
For some properties.
If you don't even get your bid accepted, you're out that $100,000.
Right. And it's viewed by hedge funds as cost of doing business.
That is incredible. You just said you think retail and office is heading toward Armageddon. Can you explain that?
You don't have to be in a city to do business with a city anymore. And in Manhattan, you know what the occupancy rate in Manhattan is right now?
For office and retail?
Just office, 30%. I don't think it's ever, my opinion, and this is my opinion, ever going to go over 65%. And the devastation, or I call it Armageddon, that's going to happen to these office properties are just mind-boggling. I mean, at 65%, you cannot pay your debt service. So I'm predicting an avalanche of foreclosures. I've been through this before in the 90s and in 2008. And you can't. I mean, office and retail property owners, because of the pandemic, have lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in back rent, right? You can't have a pizza store who owes $80,000 because he couldn't pay the rent and say, I want my $80,000. You'll put him out of business. And empty units don't make you money. Also in Manhattan, if a tenant was paying $80 a foot and had 30,000 square feet, let's say a law firm, his lease has got a year left or he wants to renegotiate. So I don't need 30,000 square feet because my employees haven't been in the office for a year. I only need 15,000 square feet. Now look at the ramifications. And I don't want to pay $80 a foot. I only want to pay $65 a foot because there's comparable space across the street. Well, when you reduce that property from $80 a foot to $70 or $65 a foot, your property value goes into the toilet. Coupled with, you have to reconfigure the 15,000 square feet that the existing tenant wants now, only 15,000. You have to reconfigure that. You have to give him some, TI, tenant improvement money, free rent. And then you got to reconfigure the new 15,000 square feet. Maybe bathrooms on the wrong side, or et cetera. It costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars. You got to pay a broker's fee, substantial broker's fee to get that new tenant. You have to give the new tenant TI, free runs rent, and it might take you 6 months to get a tenant. And that's just for one tenant who wants to give up half his space. You multiply that by these buildings and see what the economic effect is. It's devastating. And I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong. I think office buildings are headed towards Armageddon. I'm doing a whole article on it right now, and I'm going to be on Clubhouse doing it. And it's horrible, but that's reality.
What do you see in the multifamily space? And I know in your book, you talk about the frenzy right now to buy multifamily. What's your take there?
I think it's going to continue for a number of reasons. Number one, there's $300 billion of what they call dry powder on the sidelines, just want to jump into real estate. A lot of that money is not going into office or retail. And it's going, when you get zero in the bank or close to it, retail is the darling. There's a residential is the darling. First of all, the financing is tremendous. I just refinanced a mortgage on 130 units. I got 2.5% interest only for 10 years. You know what that does to my cash flow? Okay. Now interest rates might go up a little bit or whatever, but I see a lot of the money diverted again from office and retail into residential. There's also a shortage of residential. A lot of people have been priced out of houses. They're too high, so they want to rent. There's also cultural differences with the younger generations, like Generation X, the millennials who don't want to own. They don't know, everything is basically portable now. So I see residential as keep increasing, and I see rents keep going up. Not as much as they have been, but residential, when you're getting zero in the bank, still represents a good return on your money. And more people are taking on more risk for less reward than ever before. So that's what I see. I see residential still being very strong. Look at Florida, look at Texas, and then you look at a state like, or a city like New York City going the opposite way. New York City has an invisible sign. It says 1% is real estate industry, get out. You're not wanted here. Texas and Florida have an invisible sign, welcome. All 1% is, all real estate people, and you don't have to pay taxes. And you see this migration out of California, New York, into Texas, Florida, and other states. And I always say, if you want to make money today, get on a plane. You just can't stay in your neighborhood. Tell you a funny story. People ask me, like you did, well, is it residential, commercial, whatever? On my tax return where it says occupation, you know what I write? Opportunist. I'm an opportunist. I go where the opportunity is.
Let's bring it back to your book. Why should people read your book? Where can they find it? And how can they get in touch with you?
Well, my book is basically on Amazon. Amazon sells 80% of the books these days. My promise to you is after reading this book, you're not going to get rich, but my promise to you is that after reading this book, your knowledge of multifamily real estate and real estate in general will increase exponentially. That's the promise. I have a website that we're developing even more and more called samliebman.com. We're trying to put a community together. We want people to join our community. We'll get a newsletter. I will answer questions. This is a labor of love for me. I've made my money already. I'm not looking to be the richest guy in the cemetery, as I say. And it's a creative endeavor. And I love right now, my passion is to help people. Like these interviews, I'm enjoying myself. I'm being me. There's no airs. There's no anything. It's just me. And I'm here to help.
I appreciate you sharing the stories you've shared. I love it. I'm holding up the book for those watching on YouTube, but if you're listening, the book is called Harvard Can't Teach What You Learned from the Streets, The Street Success Guide to Building Wealth Through Multifamily Real Estate. Sam, I think you've given us some really great insight into how you do your due diligence, how you find that hidden story by doing psychological due diligence. And I love the stories you've shared, especially about the gentleman who pointed out the fire across the street. Great stuff. Thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing it with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Pleasure for me too. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.